Okay, so we're going to go ahead and start in about 30 seconds. Is everybody able to hear us fine, and is the audio and the video okay? Okay. So with that, we'll begin today's webinar titled Eating to Heal. And today's conversation, we're going to be talking a lot about diet and nutrition. And the reason why I'm calling this a conversation is because I want it to be this way. I want it to be interactive because there's, what I want to do is try to dispel a lot of myths or around of misunderstanding around our diet and nutrition, which is causing a lot of damage to our chronic health. And so if anybody has any questions, please do post it up. Please do comment in the comment section. If anything is unclear, please let us know so that we can, so that I can clarify it. Okay. Somebody's saying that they can't hear us on YouTube. I think that may be an issue with your sound because other people on YouTube are able to hear. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and start. So first of all, right, in the field of nutrition, the first thing is that why are we even talking about nutrition? So majority of the advice around diet and nutrition has been very confusing and has been very obscure. And over the past 50 to 70 years, things have drastically changed, right? And so our diets have changed. We've seen a rise in almost an epidemic proportion of chronic diseases, diabetes, hypertension, obesity, cardiovascular disease. All these diseases have been on an astronomical rise. Not only that, one of the things that has become increasingly clear in the past year and a half because of the pandemic is that people are in very poor metabolic health. And what do I mean by that? We know now that people that are at the highest risk of getting severe COVID, for example, or dying from COVID, have are likely to have four major diseases, right? And what are they? They're either number one, obesity, number two, diabetes, number three, hypertension, and number four, heart disease. So if these are present, then the likelihood of having severe COVID infections or dying from COVID is very, very high. Similarly, vitamin D deficiency. Vitamin D deficiency has been linked to severe COVID. We also know that ultra-processed food is something that weakens our immune system. It weakens our immune response. We know that metabolic disease like obesity reduce the immune response to the vaccine by almost 50%, which is very, very concerning. And why is it concerning? Because 1 in 3 Americans are metabolically unhealthy. And this is the same pretty much globally around the world, as we shall see. So what has happened is that we have had pseudoscientific claims that are made by the food industry. We've had the sad fact that majority of the doctors, physicians, and specialists that we look towards for nutritional advice are just not taught or equipped to do so. And I know that for a fact because in all of my medical school training and majority of the medical schools around the country barely even touch upon the subject of nutrition or lifestyle in any meaningful depth to offer solutions or to offer as a viable option for treatment of chronic illnesses. And that's a sad fact. So, and what we find is that even though modern medicine has come a long way, that we're able to do robotic surgeries, we're able to put stents, and we're able to clear blockages in vessels that are as thin as the human hair, right? But one of the areas that we have been a colossal failure is preventive medicine. Because what has happened is that if you see here in this pie chart that 90% of the deaths occurring nowadays are because of these chronic diseases, because of these lifestyle diseases that are completely preventable, yet we are unable to prevent 90% of the deaths. So what has ended up happening is that quite literally that we are practicing at the very pointy end of medicine and continuing to advance that. Meanwhile, we continue to add thousands, if not millions upon millions of people that are suffer from chronic disease and chronic illnesses, right? So what's on the menu today, pun intended, is that, so first of all, we're going to be discussing our current state. How did we get here, right? Then we're going to be going into a little bit of detail as to, and try to understand the food that we eat, right? And I'm going to spend a little bit of time on here because I really want this understanding to come across. And if you have any questions, please do comment and do let us know in the Q&A at the end. And then we're going to be talking about how to eat for optimal health. Okay, so in the next few slides, we're going to be going through some trends in chronic illnesses that globally, across the world that we have seen. So first of all, we're going to follow obesity across a span of 40 years, and it's a time lapse. So as we can see here, globally across the world, over a span of 40 years, right, we see an almost an epidemic proportion of obesity that just takes over the world by a storm. So it starts in 1975, and we see that slowly over time, South America, Asia, Middle East, portions of Africa, Australia, everywhere. It's a global phenomenon that's occurring. Similarly, and if we go and look at childhood obesity rates, they follow the same trajectory, right? In over a span of 20 years, we see it taken over the world, right? And that is just one of the chronic medical illnesses. Now, if you take, for example, diabetes in the United States, it follows a very similar, it follows a very, very similar pattern where it is where it's literally taking over the country, and we know now that almost 1 in 3 Americans are pre-diabetic, and one out of 10 Americans are diabetic, are floridly diabetic. So it's not that the people are not motivated or people prefer to live like this, right? But because of decades of bad advice and very, very clever marketing, people are confused, just like the professionals are confused. So what I would like to try to do today is to clear up some common misconceptions around the food that we eat and around nutrition. So what is the current state that we're in, and are certain myths or a certain beliefs surrounding around our diets? And some of them is that we believe that we can eat whatever we want. Right? We can eat whatever we want because a calorie is a calorie. We equate 100 calories of, say, ice cream to 100 calories of a bowl of salad, because at the end of the day, we can get on a treadmill and burn those calories off, right? Because we have to exercise to lose weight and burn the calories, right? And we also believe that most chronic illnesses are genetic. And if somebody is unfortunate enough to get one of these chronic illnesses, the way to cure these are either through medication or through some sort of surgery or through some sort of procedure where they can reverse or treat these chronic lifestyle diseases. So what I want to get across is these are misunderstandings. These are myths. Why? As we shall see. So for a big portion of my career thus far, I have been practicing in an acute care setting, which is basically the tertiary end of the system, right? So it is where we deal with most of the complications from all these chronic illnesses that we see. So heart disease, stroke, cancers, dementia. And what's interesting is that if we examine that what happens in any other industry, right? In any other industry, when there is a system failure, which these which the rise of these chronic illnesses are population-wide, any industry, how does any other industry deal with system failure? Is that they understand to try to work out the root cause of the system failure. But for some reason, it is the healthcare industry that completely chooses to ignore these system failures, right? These colossal system failures that that are increasingly producing mass numbers, epidemic proportions of chronic medical illnesses completely go ignored. Yet what we try to do is we try to treat these symptoms from these very expensive procedures, very expensive medications, meanwhile completely ignoring the root causes. So in my estimation, these failures, which are the rise of the chronic medical illnesses, usually result from the deficiencies in one of the core healthcare pillars. And what are these core healthcare pillars? Number one, diet and nutrition. Number two, purposeful and proficient movement. Number three, proper sleep, rest, and recovery. And number five is stress management or mental well-being. So these four pillars are built upon what? Knowledge and the correct application of that knowledge, right? When these pillars are built on that, the application of this correct knowledge, that it is then when you can get health and wellness. So what we're going to be talking about today is the first broken pillar, which is diet and nutrition. Now, for the majority of us, our diet or our what we've been told about diet and what we've been told about nutrition looks something like this, right? It comes from the food pyramid, right? Or the things like My Plate, as to how much we should be eating and what should be on our plates and how much grains and how much meats and how much oils that we should be consuming. Now, keep in mind that these dietary guidelines were developed early in the 1970s based on a lot of research and exciting research that was done in the early 50s and 60s, right? And during that time, what happened was, because of now proven to be erroneous research, fats came out as the quote unquote boogeyman of our diet and nutrition. It was thought that cholesterol is bad, fats are bad, animal fats are the worst, and they all cause heart disease. Therefore, a diet that is as low as possible in dietary fats is the healthiest of diets. Right. So that was the claim that all this research was made, that was made. And based off of this research, we had these guidelines that were issued. And to this day, these guidelines are being followed. Right. That we should a big portion of our diets should be coming from breads, rice, pastas, and grains. Then we should have 6 to 8 servings of fruits and vegetables, only 2 to 3 servings of some meats, and use oils very, dietary fats very sparingly, and to completely avoid animal fats. So this was the dietary guidelines that were set forth, and these were put out. Right? It was put out by the government, and the reason why these are important is because every single public school, every single public health institution that has any sort of food service has to implement these, or implement their dietary guidelines based on these food pyramids and My Plate, right? So, for example, it is the reason why we see only skim milk being served in schools. And in a lot of places, in order for children to get healthier whole milk, they have to get a letter from their doctor stating that they need whole milk as opposed to skim milk, which blows our mind, right? Now, so we were told that this is what a healthy breakfast looks like. So what happened, right? If those dietary guidelines were based on sound research, we should have seen Americans getting healthier. We should see people getting more metabolically healthy, less disease burden, better cardiovascular health in people. But no, what did we see? As we saw in earlier time lapse videos, is that it got worse and worse, and it continues to get worse, right? We see more diabetics now than they were in the 70s. We see rising rates of hypertension. We see rising rates of obesity, super morbid obesity, super morbid obesity, and the like, right? And here we can see that, right? We see that trends in obesity, trends in extreme obesity, right, have continued to skyrocket. When? Right around here, right around the 1970s, when these low-fat dietary guidelines were issued, we see an astronomical and almost exponential rise in what? Sugar consumption and wheat consumption. And this is directly because If one macronutrient goes down, fats, the others have to go up. And the ones that went up were the sugar industry, the wheat industry, the grain industry. Their sales skyrocketed, right? So we see simultaneously obesity rates going up. We see extreme obesity rates going up, and in the graph next to it, we see rates of diabetes going up. And if we plot hypertension, if we plot or early dementia, if we plot polycystic ovarian syndrome, if we plot any of the chronic modern medical illnesses that we see in the society, they've all gone up, right? So therefore, it is very, very important for us to understand our food, right? So what is our food made up of, right? So food is basically divided into two portions, two components. One, the macronutrients, and number two, the micronutrients. The macronutrients are the fats, the proteins, or the carbohydrates, and the micronutrients are the vitamins and the minerals in very small proportion compared to the macronutrients. So here we have the diagrammatic representation of what macronutrients are. So we have the carbohydrates, which are found in, the rice, the bread, the pasta, the fruits, the starchy vegetables. These are the carbohydrates. And then we have the proteins, which are usually found in meats, things like eggs, cheese, etc. And then we have the fats, which are usually found in nuts, oils, certain vegetables, certain kind of fatty fish. Now, what's important to note here is that the body has two energy systems, the carbohydrate energy system and the fat energy system, right? It can derive energy from these two sources, right? Now, another very important thing to note is that naturally occurring whole foods, foods that are not processed, right? Very important. Foods that are not processed usually or most often occur in majority fats, majority of them are proteins, or majority are carbohydrates. If they occur in combination, the combination is fats and proteins together. Naturally occurring whole foods never occur together with carbohydrate and fats. That combination you will never find in natural whole foods, right? So, what are the two main problems we see today? The two main problems we see today are, number one is the issue of processed foods, right? And we'll talk about them. Number two is the abundance and the excess consumption of carbohydrates and refined sugars. These are the two main problems, and we'll discuss them one by one. So number one, the issue of processed foods. Now, the issue of the processed food, as I mentioned before, naturally occurring foods are never in a combination of carbohydrates and fats. But what the food manufacturers have found a way to do is to mix together the carbohydrates with the fats. And it produces a very toxic combination for the body, right? Causing a whole host of metabolic disease, because that combination is very inflammatory for the body. Right. The way they find and the other thing they found they have found a way is they have developed these seed oils, right? These artificial seed oils. Now, these were done primarily because they were earlier in the 50s and 60s. The research that was done showed that animal fats were somehow linked to heart disease. So they came up with these artificial vegetable oils because animal fats were bad, vegetables are good, therefore vegetable oils are also good. So we have, the byproduct of that was these seed oils, which are extremely toxic, now known to be extremely toxic to cardiac health, to metabolic health. And these are things like canola oil, soybean oil, sunflower oil, and these are listed here. So these are, what they do is that A, they're very pro-inflammatory for the body, and B, they're associated with a whole host of metabolic disease because they're high in omega-6, right? And so they disrupt the natural balance of the body, right? And they should be avoided at all costs, right? Now, the other thing is the issue, as I mentioned, of the processed and the ultra-processed foods. This is done primarily by food makers and food manufacturers for one and one reason only, and it is for taste. Right? It is not for any health reason. No matter what they say, it is not done for taste, right? Because they're able to process foods and mix it with these oils, they're able to enhance the taste so that these foods are almost they have addictive properties. Number one, and number two is that they're able to transport them, and they have extremely long shelf lives. So we find foods that can remain on shelves for months, for weeks, months, even years, and they can be transported across the world. So it's very beneficial for the food manufacturers to employ these processed foods. Now, let's go on to the next section, which was the issue, as I mentioned, which was the second main problem, right? And that was the overconsumption and the overabundance of carbohydrates and refined sugars. So in order to understand that, let's recap one of the things that I mentioned earlier, and that is that the body has two energy systems. Number one is the energy system that's fueled by carbohydrates, which is glucose. And the second energy system is here, which is the fatty acid energy system that's fueled by our body fat stores, right? Now, our bodies are created in a way to rely more on the fatty acid store, right? Utilizing our fats for energy. That is a more sustainable energy source. But what has happened nowadays, or in the past 50, 60 years, because of the overconsumption and overabundance of carbohydrates, is that our bodies are overly dependent on this carbohydrate energy source, which is causing a whole host of problems. And we will go into a little bit of detail how that has happened, because that is if that is one point that you walk away today, it is this point. It is the overabundance and consumption of refined sugars and carbohydrates. So let's talk about carbohydrates. So what it is one of the macronutrients in our foods. And what is it, right? So things like rice, things like sugar, bread, pasta, starchy vegetables like potatoes, or vegetables that root vegetables, barley, wheat. So a lot of people are like, okay, so those sound like very natural, very whole foods. So what's wrong with that, right? Now, what's the deal with carbohydrates? Now, a normal blood volume is about 5 liters, right? In all of that 5 liters, the circulating amount of sugar in your blood at any given time is about 4 grams. 4 grams. That amounts to less than a teaspoon of sugar, right? And that is very tightly controlled by the body, because anything more than that is toxic for the body. Anything less than that, and it's deadly for the body. So that range is very tightly controlled. So anytime you eat, say for example, you put 2 teaspoons of sugar in your coffee, the body has to quickly account for that, right? Anytime you eat more than the required amount of carbohydrates that in the blood, the body has to quickly account for that. And it does that through the hormonal system, and majority of the being done by only one hormone, that's being insulin. That being insulin. So insulin has to continuously insulin has to continuously come in play if we're eating excess carbohydrates and try to regulate the sugar levels in our body, right? So the next section, what I want to do is to look through some very common food items and see how they affect our blood sugar, right? And what effect do they have on our body? Things that we might think are very healthy, things that we might, in our estimation, are natural or quote unquote healthy foods, right? So say, for example, let's take the example of a Cliff Bar, a very commonly used snack item or lunch item or breakfast item. People usually take it with them to work or school, right? So let's take the Cliff Bar challenge. And here we have the ingredient list from a Cliff Bar. Now, what I want all of you to do that are watching here is to go through this ingredient list. It's about 23 ingredients. Now, I want you to identify the sugars that you see here, and I want you to identify the number of processed ingredients and the number of seed oils. So we'll take a minute here and just go through the ingredient list quickly, right? And then if you can write in the comment section just how many sugars you think they are, how many processed ingredients there. Let's do it really quickly. So I'll give everyone a minute. So identify the number of sugars, the number of processed ingredients, and the number of seed oils in this in this ingredient list for the Cliff Bar. So I'll make this a little bit bigger. So if any but let's proceed. Okay, so in this Cliff Bar, now, all right, sorry. Now, Muhammad Ali once said, your hands can't hit what your eyes can't see, right? Now, the food manufacturers and the sugar industry is very smart. There are over 200 different names for sugars, right? And as we can see here, these are only some of them because there are 200, listing all 200 would, that's a lot, right? So now we've already seen the examples of seed oils. We've already seen what processed ingredients are, and now we know some of the names for sugar. So let's go back to that same quote unquote healthy Cliff Bar and take a look at the ingredient list, right? So in the ingredient list, right, in a Cliff Bar, it has 23 ingredients. There's 12 different sources of sugar. 21 out of the 23 are processed, and there's one processed seed oils. So now you ask yourself again, is this Cliff Bar that we generally think is healthy, is it healthy, right? And the net effect, right? The other important point to understand is that biochemically, when we eat carbohydrates, whether that be a simple sugar, right? Whether that be a simple sugar or whether that be a complex carbohydrate like bread or rice, the body breaks it all down to simple sugar, which is glucose, right? And that's what it absorbs, right? So at the end result is always sugar. Now, a single spoon of a single Cliff Bar ends up looking like this to your body: 5 teaspoons of sugar, right? So imagine in a circulating blood volume, happily going along, less than a teaspoon of sugar. You're eating a Cliff Bar, it's flooded with 5 teaspoons of sugar, right? And that is just a snack for some people, right? Or just breakfast for some people. And that's more than a day's worth of glucose that it has to account for, right? So let's take another example, right? So now these are some of the cereals that, families eat. Their kids are eating Captain Crunch, and the adults are like, we want to be healthy, and we're going to eat Honey Bunches of Oats because it has granola and because it has honey in it, right? So what do we see here? 17 grams in Captain Crunch, 16 grams of added sugar in granola. Both of these cereals have about 4 teaspoons of added sugar per serving. And that's not even accounting for the milk that you're going to put on top of it, right? So, sorry. Again, another cereal that's considered very healthy, Raisin Bran Crunch, right? Because it's got raisin in it, it's got bran in it, right? It's got the sun with ladles of raisin. So it has to be healthy, right? What do we find? 19 grams of added sugar, right? 19 grams of added sugar per serving, which amounts to about 5 teaspoons of sugar, not accounting for milk, right? So here we see brown sugar, brown rice syrup, corn syrup, molasses, honey. These are all added sugars that are eventually in your body going to be digested and end up in your blood as simple sugars, glucose. What ends up happening is that more and more and more insulin is secreted and has to work overtime, double time. Just try to figure out what to do with that all that sugar, either store it or use it for energy, right? Okay, again, people work out, go to the gym, right? They're running on a treadmill for 30 minutes, 40 minutes, or they're lifting weights for an hour, 2 hours. And then what? They take a vitamin water because it's vitamin water, right? But it's not vitamin water. It has less than 1% vitamins, but it has 27 grams of added sugar. That amounts to almost 8 or 9 teaspoons of sugar, right? So what's the point of going to the gym? What's the point of running on a treadmill when you're going to end up drinking a vitamin water and have consumed 8 teaspoons of sugar? A lot of people think yogurts, flavored yogurts are very healthy. It's whole food, right? No, it's not. It got 17 grams of added sugar. It's loaded with sugar, right? But then you might be like, no, I eat Chobani. Greek yogurt's much healthier. Let's do flavored Greek yogurt. Okay, 6 teaspoons of sugar, right? That's more sugar than we should eat in an entire day. So the whole point of highlighting these is that there are so many different kinds of hidden sugars in our food that the food manufacturers have relabeled or labeled, right? So that we don't even identify them anymore, right? And we eat them on a daily basis, and our bodies have to continuously working day in, day out, day in, day out. And what happens? Eventually, we see, which is why we see what we see nowadays, right? A rising epidemic of all these diseases, because the bodies eventually give out. This insulin system that's designed, that one poor hormone insulin that's working breakfast, snack, lunch, snack, dinner, snack, every single time, right? Having to account for 5 tablespoons of sugar there, 8 tablespoons of sugar there, 20 tablespoons for breakfast, 30 for dinner. Sooner or later, it gives out. So we have to be smarter when we go grocery shopping. We have to identify, we have to know how to read the labels. And we serve our kids things similar to that. For example, here, the Cliff Kid Bar, 3.5 tablespoons of teaspoons of sugar for children for a snack, right? So, as I mentioned, when we go to the grocery store, identify, look for these things. Look for things that have the lowest amount of sugar, lowest amount of carbohydrates, right? And swap them out for similar things that have no sugar, have no added sugar. Try to look for them, right? Now, so far, I've mentioned things that are somewhat processed, right? Whether that be Cliff Bars, whether that be cereals. These are all processed foods. But a lot of people can be like, well, I only eat bread, or I eat rice, or I eat whole wheat pasta. It's very important to understand, as I mentioned before, that the body breaks all these down to simple sugars. So yes, avoiding processed food is good, but we also have to avoid the overabundance and overconsumption of these quote unquote whole foods, such as rice, bread, pasta, etc. Because we see here that one serving of rice, right? So one serving is about the size of your palm right here, right? That's one serving of rice. Now, first ask yourself, how many people eat one serving of rice for dinner or for lunch? Usually it involves eating 2 or 3 servings of rice, right? Now, one serving of white rice has the equivalent effect of almost 9.6 teaspoons of sugar in your blood, right? That's white rice. White bread, 8 teaspoons. Brown bread, 6 teaspoons, right? So now all of a sudden, all these benign, whole, organic foods don't seem very healthy when you are over consuming them on a daily basis, right? Monthly, weekly, yearly. And what happens is that people end up with chronic insulin resistance, which is the root cause of pretty much all chronic disease, right? So again, we go back to this healthy breakfast that looks very healthy when you look at it. We got the fruits, we got cereal, we got orange juice, but look at it, right? With cornflakes, milk, side of toast, and apple juice, right? It's a very part of a healthy breakfast, what a lot of people think, right? But it ends up being how many? Close to 20 teaspoons of sugar to start your day. To start your day, you're starting your day with 20 teaspoons of sugar. So just to start, your insulin level has to go so high in your body, and your hormonal system is working double time, extra time, just to account for all that sugar that you just consumed. Right? And so a lot of people are like, but that's how it's always been. People eat a lot of, people have always been eating a lot of bread and rice and sugars. Well, that's not how it's always been, right? 100 years ago, the average the number of teaspoons of sugar people were eating per day was 3, and now it's almost 20. So no, right? With the advent of processed food available everywhere, with the advent of bread being available everywhere, rice being available everywhere, pasta being available everywhere, we're over consuming, we're overeating, we're overtaxing our systems. And we see this, right? We were told that low fat food is good, but what happened is that wheat consumption and sugar consumption skyrocketed. And when it skyrocketed, every single chronic medical illness also skyrocketed with it, because of the root cause. And the root cause is insulin resistance. So any food group that drives up your insulin, which is carbohydrates, right? Majority of them are carbohydrates, whether simple or complex, are going to cause insulin resistance. The the more you abuse them, to use the word abuse, yes, the more you abuse them, the sooner you're going to get insulin resistance. And we know now that insulin resistance, right? We see the diseases, separate diseases, as early dementia, hypertension, obesity, or morbid obesity, or arterial disease, are all the underlying disease, and all of them is insulin resistance. Right? And we see all the other minor diseases that we think are all separate and unrelated, like reflux, or certain cancers like breast cancers and colon cancers, or in women, polycystic ovarian syndrome, or a metabolic syndrome, or hypertension. These are all linked directly as a result of insulin resistance. And I talked about insulin resistance in detail in my last webinar, and I will link it below as well for those people that want to rewatch it. And in that, I talk about and go into detail how individually it's relating to these chronic illnesses, right? And this is not some new science that people have just discovered, and it's been there. People have been writing about it. People have been talking about it. How our diets and our lifestyle and this overconsumption of sugars and processed food and seed oils are affecting our health negatively, right? And across disciplines, right? So if books like Nutrition and Physical Degeneration by Dr. Weston Price, who's a dentist, and he saw people that lived in indigenous communities that were not that did not have access to processed foods and refined sugars, and they were eating more whole foods and were eating more animal fats and proteins. They were in significantly better health, and they were a complete absence of these chronic medical illnesses. What Dr. Bickman in his book describes as plagues of prosperity, right? See, all these diseases are associated with this modern phenomenon of processed foods and ultra processed foods and overconsumption of carbohydrates, right? And another amazing book to read is A Doctor in the Wilderness. Here, Dr. Walter Yellowlees, who is a wilderness medicine doctor, who's a primary care physician in a once rural community, and he practices there for 40 years. And he documents in those 40 years over time, with the introduction of processed foods and sugars, is a complete destruction of society in people's health. He sees diseases, he documents diseases that were never present in where he practiced, completely transforming the society. Obesity, diabetes, hypertension, cancers, everything, right? So now, what do we do about it, right? What has happened and what can we do about it? So, as I mentioned, all of this happened as a result that we were told that low-fat diets were good for us, that eggs were bad, that animal fats were bad, and instead we should be eating. They didn't tell us what to eat. They mostly just avoid low fats, and automatically, if you're avoiding one, the other automatically goes up, which being carbohydrate. So we basically have to tip that balance back, right? So we have to completely avoid processed carbohydrates, and we have to talk about healthy fats, right? Because there's a lot of misconception around fats and that as a macronutrient. People think that fats, heart disease, fats clog your arteries, fats are just evil and bad. But we have to understand that fats are essential, right? The three macronutrients that we talked about: fats, carbohydrates, and proteins. Two of the three, the proteins and the fats, are the only macronutrients that are essential, that we have to eat, right? Carbohydrates, even if we didn't eat a single carbohydrate, our body can make carbohydrate itself, right? But it can't do that with protein. It can't do that with fats. We have to consume it. They're essential to life. Carbohydrates are not essential to life, right? And that concept is very important to understand, right? Because we were told cholesterol is bad, but it's essential for life. For example, our brain and nervous system accounts for 2% of our entire body weight, yet it holds 20% of all the cholesterol in our body. So 20% of all the cholesterol in our body is in our nervous system. And we see that elderly people who go or people that follow a low carb diet for a very long time, people who take statins to lower their cholesterol levels and lower their total cholesterol levels, what happens? They have early dementia. It's linked to early dementia. They have cognitive decline. People that have very low LDLs as elderly, they have cognitive decline, right? And that's been proven that, elderly people or people that are very aggressive about lowering their LDLs, it is not very good for health. It's especially for cognitive health, right? So a very important concept to understand is this concept, that homographs. Now, in English language, homographs are two words that are spelled the same but mean completely different things. For example, the word bark. Dog barks, there's tree barks. Two words spelled same, two different words. What has happened is that we think this equals this, right? We think fats in our food and diet equals this, when that is so really very, very far from the truth, right? Fats do not cause people to become fat. Fats do not cause people to develop heart disease. Yes, if you eat processed foods, which, as I mentioned, marry the two deadly that have the deadly combination of high processed carbs with fats, that is deadly. But fat in themselves, that macronutrient is very healthy and vital for your health, right? So just to conclude now, how do we eat for optimal health? So a lot of people are, okay, so we can't eat this, we can't eat this, we can't eat this. So what can we eat, right? So the common misconception is that if we're taking out rice, bread, pasta, and starchy vegetables, that kind of get rid of every single thing we eat. But on the contrary, no, it allows you to eat a lot of things that you may have not thought that were, either never introduced yourself to in your diet, but they're vital for good health. For example, a lot of people stave off eggs because they just think that they're unhealthy, but eggs are very healthy. Similarly, fish. A lot of veggies, a lot of vegetable, nuts, oils, seeds. You can eat fruits. The issue around fruits is that, again, it is an overabundance, an overconsumption of these fruits, right? So, for example, fruits are supposed to be eaten in season, but what we find is that we have watermelon in the dead of winter, super sweet watermelon in the dead of winter. That's not natural, right? So we have to eat fruits in moderation and in season. Right? Okay. So just some tips for eating in a way that's optimal for our health, right? So number one is reduce your total carbohydrate intake, right? That cannot be stressed enough. We have to reduce our carbohydrate intake. How much carbohydrate? Ideally, less than 100 milligrams. Ideally less than 100 grams of carbohydrate. But if you want to have a ceiling for yourself, then it should be no more than 150 grams of carbohydrates. And this is easily done by if you eliminate sugars, if you eliminate refined carbohydrates, which is Wonder Bread, white bread, etc., and significantly reduce or eliminate starchy vegetables and grains from your diet. So these are the three ways that you can reduce your total carbohydrate consumption. That's number one. Number two is completely eliminate processed foods and ultra processed foods. So candies and these snacks and etc. that I sort of mentioned in the slides earlier, they really need to be eliminated from families and people's health, people's diets. Number three, eat vegetables. Eat vegetables that are sustainably farmed, that are sustainably grown, and eat vegetables that grow above the ground. They're very high in nutrients. They are very high in vitamins, and they're high in fiber. They're healthy. Vegetables that grow below the ground are just storage vessels. They store all the starch, and starch is all sugar, right? So the body breaks all of that down to sugar, again, driving up that insulin, causing insulin resistance, and leading to all the diseases that I mentioned earlier. Number four, eat meat and eat animal fats. They are okay and they are healthy for you, right? Now, if you are a vegan, you can still follow, and reduce carbohydrate intake, but don't leave meat off just because you think that it's not healthy, right? There are no health concerns around eating meat and eating animal fat. Number five, and this is a very important point, right? Because we've been told that for a long time by many people that people should be eating small, frequent meals because somehow that is healthy for their metabolism. That cannot be further from the truth, right? People should not be eating multiple meals throughout the day or multiple small meals throughout the day, right? People should be eating, there should be at least 12 hours or more of a period in a 24-hour period where people should go without food. And the reason why that is because that is the only way the body can tap into the fatty acid system for energy. Otherwise, it's going to it's only going to do one thing, and that is store. So it's always going to be in the storage mode of storage mode. It is never going to be on the utilizing those stores, which is why we see that we have rising levels and epidemics of overweight, obesity, morbid obesity, super morbid obesity, right? Because people are constantly eating, constantly driving that insulin, constantly in the storing phase. So that fatty acid system is not even used. Only the glucose system is being used. And the last one is that drink water, not calories. Now, I know a lot of, it's very common, and we're told, orange juice, for example, is part of a healthy breakfast. It is not. Those are just empty liquid sugar calories. Food should be eaten. Food should not be drunk. Should not be consumed as liquid. So this whole culture of juicing and all that stuff, it has shown no benefit, right? Eat the vegetables, eat the fruits, but don't drink them, right? So with that, so so has this proven effective, right? So let's talk about that. So in our clinic, we do that, right? We do that with patients. The people that have like type 2 diabetes, people have that obesity, overweight, and other chronic medical illnesses like hypertension. We put them on this diet. We completely, with monitoring them, we trial them on this, right? We take their carbohydrates and we reduce them. We, if they were eating 300, we go down 200, 100, and as low as we can. And what do we see, right? So we have here is that this gentleman came to us with on 5 medications, a lifelong diabetic for 20 years on 5 medications, right? With an A1C that was consistently going up in the past 10 years, right? We discontinued all the medications just through diet, not even exercise, just through diet. We were able to take them off all the all but one medication, effectively reverse the diabetes. So they're now not even considered diabetic based on their metabolic profile, and effective weight loss, right? So all this is done, not a single procedure and not a single medication. If anything, medications were taken away, right? And we see that time and time again in this, right? We see this gentleman here dropped close to 40 pounds just following diet, right? Another gentleman here, reverse diabetes, again, just nutritional change. This is not even including any of the other, just nutrition reversing disease. And this is proven again and again and through multiple studies. The only thing is, it's time intensive, it's labor intensive, and it's not, because we're not prescribing medication, it's not, it's difficult for, I guess, in the current healthcare system to I guess, derive benefit from it. I don't know, right? But it is extremely beneficial for the patient, right? And so diabetes is one thing, right? Weight loss is one thing. But one of the main things that we see when we do this in patients specifically is they just report being healthy. They're like, we feel better, right? We don't have all those pains that we do, right? We don't have, that mental fog or that mental fatigue. We're not as drained as we used to be. So it's not just the metrics or just the blood work that we're improving. It's when you eat better, when you eat whole food, when you eat natural food, you will feel better, right? You would want to do things. You would want to spend time. Your mood becomes better. We know people that have come off of their antidepressant medications, come off of their anxiety medications. So it's not just one aspect that we are trying to improve. It's just not just your blood work and your weight, right? But it's a whole person, right? That's what we're trying to do. So with that, we will go with the Q&A, and I see a lot of questions coming through on Facebook and YouTube and I guess paper and pencil as well. Okay. All right. So okay. So one of the questions, please share examples of a healthy breakfast options, especially for kids. Eggs. I don't know what I mean. Eggs are amazing. Eggs are healthy. They have a very kids need good fats, and kids need to be to eating like healthy animal fats and cholesterol. All these things. It's part of good brain development. They're good. They're high in good omega fatty acids. But again, try pasture raised eggs and cooked in butter or cooked in ghee or cooked in olive oil or avocado oil or coconut oil. They have calories. They have healthy macronutrients. So eggs is one thing. What's it called? You could do fried meats. You could do. I mean, kids can eat fruits. I mean, you shouldn't hold back fruits for kids. Kids can eat fruits. Again, in season, non-GMO, organic. Right. That's we also have to take care of that. Okay. So the next question is right here. What does your typical breakfast look like? Okay. So my typical breakfast looks like I eat eggs with avocados and meats. Sometimes if I, want that, and a lot of cheese. I love cheese. So if I make an omelet, I'll put like 2 eggs with heavy cream, cheese, avocados. Yeah, and that lasts me until the next day. Sometimes, yeah, it's you find that once you are fat adapted, which basically means that you have primed your fatty acid system, is that you can go longer periods of time, which we'll come to a little bit in about intermittent fasting, and you can go very long periods of time, and you won't require food, right? Because the body has unlimited, virtually unlimited supply of fat stores to go to burn energy and to use for energy. Uh, Even people, for example, the Kenyan marathon runners, they have 6% body fat, yet they have that 6% body fat is enough for them to run an entire day marathon fasted, right? So, and we're carrying around us 20, 15, 20, 30% fat. So we can go a month, literally, I mean, if we fasted with no issues, in the sense that, like, if we're drinking fluids and all that stuff. So yeah, so your body has enough fat stores to sustain yourself for a long time once you're fat adapted. Okay. Next question is, should we be intermittent fasting? Yes, we should be intermittent fasting. And I know that intermittent fasting is a fad and nowadays, and it's this buzzword in the news, but it is, physiologically, that's what the normal state should be. Meaning, as I mentioned earlier, that there should be at least 12 hours or more in a 24-hour period that you should go without food, because that is the only way that the body can tap into the fat reserves to use that fat for energy. Otherwise, it is always going to be storing. So you can call it intermittent fasting, or you can call it time restricted eating, or you can call it sleeping, whatever. People should need to go 12 hours or more without food every single day. Okay. All right. Is the gallon of water a day healthy for average person? If not, what's the appropriate amount of water to drink in a day? Good question. Now, this gallon of water a day, some people say 8 glasses of water a day. There's no science behind it, right? There's no data saying that, oh, you should be drinking X number of water or X number of glasses of water. If you have healthy kidneys, right? If you feel thirsty, drink water, right? The thirst mechanism is very well developed in a normal human brain. Is that if you have, if your body is low in water, or if you're dehydrated, you are going to feel thirsty, right? Some people that say that I don't feel like drinking water, or I can go without drinking water for extended periods of time. That is fine. But there's no, I wouldn't say there's a limit of like, oh, you should drink like 4. The more hydrated you are, the better. But there's no like, oh, if you drink 4 glasses of water, you're going to be unhealthy, as opposed to somebody who's drinking 9 glasses of water or a gallon of water. If that makes things clear. Sorry. So the next question is, what's the best type of oils for cooking? Butter. If you talk about animal sources, it would be butter, it would be ghee, it would be beef tallow. So these are some animal sources of fats that are really good for cooking. And in terms of vegetable oils, it would be coconut oil, avocado oil, and olive oils. Now, keep in mind that these vegetable oils, they have different boiling points. So the certain oils you can't, and not everything you can cook in, right? So certain olive oils you can put on your salads and consume them, but you can't cook with them because it ends up being not very, it ends up losing all its health properties, right? So certain olive oil, you should avoid cooking with it, because I think the heating point is I think 400 or 350. So avocado oil is good and coconut oil is good. They have a higher heat point where you can use them for frying and stuff. But for olive oil, ideally it should be used and eaten whole, like, drizzled on salads and etc. Oh, and just in addition to that, what's the best oil of cooking? Crisco should be thrown away, right? Things like canola oil, safflower oil, sunflower oil, all those things that we see, or just cooking oil, right? Those are the dangerous toxic seed oils, and they should be avoided at all costs. Like, they should just be banned from every household. Okay. Is daily juicing beneficial or not? Apples, beetroot, oranges, carrots, ginger. So my answer would be a question as to why not just eat them rather than juice them, right? So when you eat the fruits, so there's two things, right? When you eat a fruit, it's very different than when you drink a fruit, right? Because when you drink a fruit, all you're doing is taking just the sugar out and drinking it, right? And maybe some nutrients. But in fruits, a lot of the nutrients are locked into the fiber, right? So when you eat a fruit or a vegetable, you're getting the whole thing, right? So and the other thing is that insulin response, or that sugar response, is slow. So less dangerous, as opposed to when you drink it, then all that sugar gets flooded in your blood all at once, right? Which is referred to as the glycemic index. How fast does your blood sugar rise after eating certain thing? So for example, if you eat a bread versus eating a piece of chocolate. So if you eat a piece of chocolate, an hour later, your blood level is going to be, sugar level is going to be really high, right? But if you eat bread, it might not be that high. It's going to go high in 2 or 3 hours later. They're both not very healthy in the sense that it's driving up your insulin, but one is less dangerous than the other. Okay. Are there any processed tomato sauces in a jar? Most of the tomato sauces that are sold in grocery stores are there's some level of processing going on, because that's why, if you leave a tomato out in a grocery store, it's not going to last 6 months, right? So there's some sort of processing going on. We should just see what sort of processing are they using olive oil? Are they using some sort of vinegar, or are they using some sort of chemicals, right? So we just have to be careful as to like what they're using. Okay. Now, what about processed meats like bacon and sausages? Good question. So regarding processed meats like bacon and sausages and hot dogs, etc., most often I would tell people to avoid them, right? Because most often they're from, they're very, very heavily processed, and there's a lot of sugar added to them, a lot of chemicals added to them. Again, because they need to have a long shelf life. So my recommendation would be to avoid processed meat and instead use whole meat, use fresh meat, use organic meat, use non-GMO meat, use meat that the animals haven't had antibiotics, that are pasture raised. So the better meat quality you can do, the better it is for you. Okay, so sesame oil, just a correction on that. Sesame oil is, if I mentioned that it's not bad, but it's good if it is not highly processed, right? So you have to see what kind of sesame oil it is. Some of them are very processed, especially used in a lot of restaurants. They're not very healthy, right? I would say that they're equally as bad as other seed oils, but you can get healthier forms of sesame oil. So again, because of their smoke point, you just have to make sure that you're not cooking them at very high temperature. Okay. And then please clarify, high healthy fat is not bad for the heart then? No, it is not. It is healthy for the heart. It is healthy for the brain, and it is healthy for cognitive health. Okay. And cholesterol from high healthy fat is not bad. No. Animal fats and healthy fats like avocados, avocado oil, coconut oil, salmon, mackerel, anchovies, herring, all those fatty fish that people tend to generally avoid for some reason. Those are all very, very good sources of healthy fat that are not bad for your cardiac health and for your overall general health. Okay, so I think I don't think anybody has any more questions. I think if that is all, then we can end. I think, there's one more question. Okay. All right. So, yeah, one more question just came in. Can I eat carrots? Okay. So you have to understand that you have to go step by step, right? If you're cutting out carrots but still eating potato chips, then that's you're putting you're not going in the right direction, or you're not putting it in the right order, right? So you have to cut out things that are highly processed and ultra processed first. You got to cut out the junk food first, and then go on to getting rid of the starchy whole natural foods. So you can get rid of bread, but you're still eating some sort of pizza, or other what's it called, junk food or candies or chocolates, right? So you have to take out, if you want to go in order, it would be take out the junk food and the ultra processed food, which is the candies, the chocolates, etc., right? So take out that first, then go into look through your snacking list. Like, what are things that I'm snacking at that I can either replace with healthier items, or or just cut out entirely, right? So say, for example, that those snack bars or certain types of cereals, if I can convert that into something healthier, like carrots would be fine, or celery, or avocado, or some other vegetable that you can snack on, or olives, those would be better than snacking on something else, right? Some junk food, I mean. Okay. The other thing is that we have to go, again, as I mentioned, step by step, right? We can't, if you do all at once, it's going to be very difficult, and you're just going to fall back and be like, this is too difficult for me. I can't do this. So it's very important to follow a stepwise fashion. And if you're diabetic, and if you're on medications for diabetes, or if you're on insulin, then it is very important that you do it under a supervision of a physician, to not cut out all your carbs altogether while still taking diabetes medication or medications for other things. So you have to really talk to your physician about it and do it with them. And if you're for some reason your physician is not down with the idea of you discontinuing medications and wanting to change your diet and lifestyle to reverse your disease, then maybe look for a different doctor. I'm just being honest, because a lot of diseases, especially hypertension, diabetes, can be managed very well, if not completely getting off of medication, then can be significantly reduced just through lifestyle modification, right? So those are the first steps. Okay, and the last question was about sugar alternatives. What are they, and why can't I have honey? Very, very good question. So first of all, let's one by one. Why not honey? So honey is natural. Honey is a whole food, and honey is 100% sugar, right? So the reason why, so again, honey should be used medicinally. It has many medicinal purposes. So it's very important to understand that if something is healthy, it doesn't mean it is healthy all the time, every day, 3 times a day, right? That's not what excess of anything can become a poison, right? So for example, peanuts are healthy, but if you give it to somebody who's allergic to peanuts, his throat's going to close and he's not going to live, right? Similarly, for example, bread or grains, whole grains, people think they're healthy, but if you give it to somebody who has gluten sensitivity, he's going to have a very bad reaction to it, right? Now, people with diabetes or insulin resistance or pre-diabetes are quite, in one way to put it, they are allergic to glucose or allergic to carbohydrates, right? Carbohydrates are toxic to them. So for them, honey is not healthy, right? Honey is actually dangerous. Consumption of sugars or carbohydrates for them causes worsening of their disease. So this concept of healthy needs to be taken into perspective as to whose health, because there's no such thing as universal, no food that's universally healthy, right? And then lastly, just to close it off, sugar alternatives. There's 2 kinds of sugar alternatives. One are natural and one are artificial. Artificial things are like Splenda and Sweet and Low and other things. I would completely avoid those because they're just chemicals that taste sweet on the tongue, right? Then there are natural sweeteners, such as monk fruit or stevia. These are natural sweeteners. And it would be very good if you can switch over from table sugar, brown sugar, raw sugar, etc., to these alternatives. It is an excellent way to reduce your carbohydrate consumption and glucose consumption. So I think, yeah, with that we will end because we're going over time. Why don't doctors tell you this? Well, I'm a doctor and I'm telling you this, but you're right. Doctors don't tell you this because, to be honest, myself included, and majority of the doctors we weren't trained in proper nutrition. We weren't trained in exercise physiology. It's something that we have to learn on our own. We had hardly like one small 3-week class on nutrition, and that was more like what happens if somebody's vitamin A deficient, and not as a treatment modality, but more as just what happens in excess of things. So not in any meaningful way. So I think that is why doctors don't teach this. What we are taught very well to do is to medicate and operate, and we do that very well. So we can medicate and we can operate really well. So that's one of the main reasons why we're not able to do this. Well, I hope this was beneficial. Please, if you have any for more questions, or if you have any comments, or if you have any suggestions for future talks, please do let us know. Comment here and share it with like, subscribe, share, whatever they say they do. Okay, thank you very much for joining us, and stay healthy.